There's a sound that history forgot to record. It's not the thunder of hooves or the clash of steel. It's the sound that came after music, when the fire stopped burning, when the screaming stopped, when the men who could fight were already dead and the women realized the war music hadn't ended. It had just changed into something worse. What I'm about to tell you isn't a story about war. It's a story about the most efficient system of cultural genocide music ever created. A machine so perfectly designed that it didn't just conquer empires, it erased them from existence. And at the center of this machine, a calculated state-sponsored brutality, music aimed at one target: women. This is going to disturb you. It should, because about 16 million people alive today carry the genetic proof that it worked. Their DNA is a living record of what happened when in music entire civilization decided that terror wasn't just a side effect of conquest, it was the primary weapon. And here's what makes your blood run cold. They didn't just stumble upon this strategy, they refined it. They perfected it. They turned human suffering into a science. By the end of this video, you'll understand why cities with populations of 500,000 people simply vanished from history, why entire languages went extinct, why cultures that had flourished for thousands of years ceased to exist within a single generation. And you'll understand the horrifying role that women played, not as warriors or rulers, but as the targets music of the most systematic campaign of cultural destruction the medieval world had ever seen. This is the Mongol terror machine, and once you see how it worked, you'll never look at history the same way again. If you believe that the lessons of history's most fearsome figures should never be forgotten, consider liking this video and subscribing. Your support brings more stories from the shadows of our past. Now, back to the machine that turned cruelty into a science. Let me ask you something that historians have debated for centuries. How did a nomadic people with a population of maybe 1 million conquer an empire music spanning from Korea to Hungary? How did they subjugate kingdoms with populations 50 times their size? The answer isn't what you think. Music, it wasn't superior tactics, it wasn't better weapons, it wasn't even the legendary Mongol cavalry. It was terror, but not random terror. This was music-engineered terror, terror as a technology, terror as a weapon, more powerful music than any siege engine ever built. And here's what makes your skin cruel. The evidence suggests they learned to perfect this system by trial and error, by testing different approaches, by measuring which specific atrocities made cities surrender fastest. They were scientists of suffering, and their laboratory was the known world. In 1219, before the invasion of Khwarezmia, Genghis Khan sent emissaries ahead with a simple message: "Whoever submits shall be spared, but those who resist, they shall be destroyed with their wives, children, and descendants will be put to the sword." Notice the language: wives, children, and dependent. Music get their own claws. That's not accidental. That's the promise of something worse than death. This wasn't a threat made in anger. This was policy, this was advertised, and critically they wanted you to know what was coming. Fear, they understood, travels faster than horses. Here's the brutal calculation. You have 50,000 soldiers. Ahead of you are 12 fortified cities. Each would cost you thousands of lives to take by force. Or you make an example of one city so horrific that the other 11 open their gates without a fight. You spend your brutality once like currency, and it purchases the surrender of a dozen cities. It's monstrous. Music, it's evil, and it's mathematically brilliant, and this is where it gets truly disturbing. They specifically chose cities known for their culture, air learning, their religious significance. Places like Nishapur, famous across the Islamic world for its poetry and mathematics, or MV, one of the largest cities on earth at the time. Why these cities? Because the destruction had to hurt symbolically. It had to destroy hope. When you erase one of the greatest cities in the world, every other city thinks, if it happened to them, what chance do we have? When Nishapur fell in 121, the Mongols ordered a body count. Every single person was to music be killed, and every head was to be piled in separate pyramids, one for men, one for women, one for children. The daughter of Genghis Khan's son-in-law personally oversaw the execution of the women and children. She wanted to make sure the job was thorough. When archaeologists excavated the site in the 20th century, they found a layer of ash several feet deep covering artifacts, music from one of history's greatest cities. But here's what most documentaries won't tell you. The killing was The easy part. The killing was mercy. For the women, music, who were spared, their nightmare was just beginning. The Mongol system for breaking conquered peoples wasn't random cruelty. This was a carefully orchestrated process. 5 deliberate acts executed in sequence, each designed to unmake not just a city, but a civilization. Let me walk you through each one. I'm going to tell you about a weapon so effective that 800 years later, we can still detect its impact by analyzing the DNA of people living today. The systematic use of forced reproduction as a tool of genetic conquest. When a city fell, women weren't killed. They were sorted like livestock, like treasure. The most beautiful, the most noble, the daughters of kings, music, and scholars. They were claimed by Mongol commanders. But this wasn't about desire, this was about replacement. Here's the strategy. When you force captive women to bear your children, you're not just conquering the present, you're conquering the future. Though, say children are raised Mongol, they speak Mongolian, they worship Tengri, the sky god, their mother's language forgotten, her gods forbidden, her stories lost in a single generation. It's annihilation without ruins, music, genocide without graves. In 2003, geneticists identified a Y chromosomal lineage that originated in Mongolia approximately 1,000 years ago. The estimate, 16 million men alive today carry this genetic music signature. That's roughly 0.5% of all men on Earth sharing a single male ancestor from the Mongol imperial period. One genetic lineage spreading across Asia in just a few generations. This isn't natural population growth. This is the genetic signature of conquest. But let's make this concrete. Imagine music. You're a Persian noblewoman in Nishapur in 1221. You're 23 years old. You've been educated. You read poetry. You study astronomy. Your marriage has been arranged to a prominent music merchant's son. Then the Mongols come. Your husband is killed. Your fath. is executed. Your brothers are in those pyramids outside music, the city walls. You are pulled from your home and examined like a horse at auction. A Mongol officer claims you. You don't speak his language. He doesn't care about your name. 9 months later, you give birth to his child, a son. He takes the baby from you. Music, the child will be raised in a G. He will learn to ride before he can walk. He will never know your poetry. He will never pray in your language. He will never even know what city his mother came from. That is the first act of erasure. You continue to breathe, but everything you were, your lineage, your culture, your future music, is already dead. And this happened to tens of thousands of women, city after city, nation after nation. But the Mongols understood something crucial. You can't just erase a people's future. You have to destroy music, their present. You have to break their spirit so completely that they lose the will to resist. That's where the second act comes in. And it was performed in public on purpose as theater. There's a reason why psychological humiliation is considered one of the most devastating forms of warfare. The Mongols perfected it at industrial scale. They understood that a culture's honor was inseparable from the protection of its women. The Mongols identified this as a pressure point and applied force with surgical precision. Let me tell you about February 13, 1258, when Baghdad fell. This wasn't just any city. This was the seat of the Abbasid Caliphate, the center of Islamic civilization, home to the House of Wisdom, where scholars had preserved and advanced human knowledge for 5 centuries. The Mongols under Hulagu Khan besieged the city. When the wall's music fell, estimates suggest between 200,000 to 1 million dead. The Tigris River reportedly ran black with ink from destroyed books, then red with blood. But here's where the true genius of Mongol psychological warfare reveals itself. The women of music, the Kaif's palace. Women who had never been seen by public eyes, who lived their entire lives in seclusion, who were considered almost holy. These women were dragged into the streets, their veils were torn away, their clothing was stripped, and they were paraded through the markets. These were the mothers, wives, and daughters of the man who claimed spiritual authority over hundreds of millions of Muslims. To see them music exposed, humiliated, degraded. It wasn't just an assault on those individual women, it was a message. Your leaders cannot protect even those closest to them. Your God did not intervene. Your civilization is already dead. You're just still breathing. The women were then sold in slave markets, some for as little as a single silver coin. The price wasn't about economics, it was about contempt. For the men who survived, this was a wound that never healed. You didn't just lose the war, you lost your identity as a protector. And here's what makes this calculated. The Mongol LS didn't do this everywhere. Cities that surrendered music early were often spared. The humiliation was advertised ahead of the army surrender, and you keep your dignity. Resist and we'll make sure your grandchildren feel ashamed to speak your name. This is terror as technology as a system. But we're only at the second act. I'm about to describe a siege tactic so brutal that when Persian historians first recorded it, readers assumed it must be exaggeration, but multiple sources confirm it. The tactic was called karash in Persian, translating to human cattle or living boards. The Mongols would conquer city A, then keep captives alive, not out of mercy, for logistics. When besieging city B, these captives would be driven forward at sword points toward the walls. Women with babies, elderly people, children, all forced to advance. As the Mongol army assembled behind this human barrier, the defenders faced an impossible choice: shoot and kill your own people, or hold fire and watch them on. Gauls advanced siege equipment using human shields. Either choice destroyed morale. This tactic achieved multiple objectives: physical protection for Mongol soldiers, psychological warfare that gave defenders no good options, and practical efficiency as the bodies of those who fell were piled into mows, literally used as fill to create ramps for siege towers. If you were a captive woman, your final purpose might be to fall into music a moat and have your corpse used as a bridge so the men who enslaved you could walk over your dead body to enslave the next city. You weren't a person. You were construction material, an expendable resource measured in bodies. The Persian historian Juvenai recorded multiple instances of this. The Secret History of the Mongols references it. Chinese and Russian sources describe the same practice. Archaeological excavations have found mass graves at the base of city walls. People killed music by defensive fire from above. The human shield was doctrine. If you survived the siege, your reward was a 1,000-mile death march to be sold in a slave market. Welcome to the fourth act, the greatest forced migration in human history. The Mongol Empire stretched from the Pacific to Eastern Europe. It ran on a currency more valuable than silver, human snorts beings. After each conquest, the sorting began. Skilled artisans sent to Karakoram, laborers sent to work music camps. Women, especially young women, were the most sought-after commodity in slave music markets. When Genghis Khan invaded the Khwarezmian Empire between 1219 and 1221, the population dropped from 15 million to less than 7 million. Where did those 8 million people go? Many were marched to slave markets across Asia. Women from Uzbekistan ended up in Mongolia. Women from Baghdad ended up in China. The Mongol Empire created the most efficient slave trade system since Rome. In Samarkand, slave markets became permanent institutions with standardized pricing and even war. If a slave died within the first month, you could get a music refund. These markets existed for generations. By the late 13th century, there were merchants whose entire business across multiple music generations was buying and selling human beings. A woman from Nishapur could end up sold in China 4,000 meters away. Her children would never know her homeland. Her grandchildren wouldn't even know what language she had spoken. Entire ethnic groups were scattered so thoroughly they ceased to exist as identifiable music peoples. This is why Central Asian genetics show such incredible mixture today. Music, it's the signature of the largest forced relocation in history. We've covered 4 acts: biological replacement, public humiliation, human shields, continental scale trafficking. But there's a 5th act, and it might be the most disturbing because it's the one that worked most completely. The 5th act is the eraser of memory itself. When the Mongols burned cities, they specifica. Lee targeted the people who held cultural knowledge. Poets were killed, historians were executed, religious scholars' music eliminated. Anyone who could preserve and pass on cultural knowledge was considered a threat. In Baghdad, the house music of wisdom was destroyed. Books were thrown into the Tigris River in such quantities that chronicles said you could walk across the river on floating pages. Why target these people? Because the Mongols understood you don't just burn the books, you kill the people who could rewrite them. Think about what we've described across these 5 acts. Women forced to bear music, conquerors, children. social structures shattered through humiliation, resistors used as disposable music weapons, survivors scattered across continents, knowledge keepers' music systematically eliminated. This is genocide with surgical music precision. This is how you make a civilization disappear so completely that within 2 generations no one remembers it existed. I'm going to list some names. You probably won't recognize them. That's the point. MV, possibly the largest city in the world in 1221. Population 500,000. Today ruins in a Turkmenistan desert that most people have never heard of. Nishapur, a jewel of Persian civilization. Today the medieval city is buried under centuries of dirt. Urgent music capital of the Mongol Empire. The Mongols diverted a river to flood it. Today, an empty plain. These were major cities, centers of learning and culture, and they were so thoroughly destroyed that most modern people have never heard of them. That's successful erasure. Here's the final cruelty. In most pre-modern societies, women were the carriers of cultural memory. They taught children their first words, they told the stories, they maintained family histories by systematically targeting women through violence, enslavement, and forced assimilation. The Mongols were attacking music, the transmission mechanism of culture itself. A woman forced to bear a Mongol child, enslaved in a foreign land, forbidden from speaking her native language, cannot music pass down her culture. The chain is broken. When this happens to thousands of women across dozens of ethnic groups, the result is cultural extinction, not in 1 generation, but within 2 or 3. By the great-grandchildren, there's no one left who remembers the cities, speaks the languages, or knows music, the songs. So let me answer the question from the beginning. How did 1 million Mongols conquer 50 million people? They built a terror machine so effective that it made resistance futile and submission the only rational choice. They perfected a 5-act music system designed to unmake civilizations from the inside out. The proof? 16 million men carry Mongol genetic lineage. Entire languages are extinct, major cities vanished, and for most victims there's no one left to remember their names. The Mongol conquest killed an estimated 40 million people, roughly 11% of the world's population. But the death toll isn't the complete story. The complete story is who they killed and how. The systematic targeting of women as a weapon of cultural destruction, music the transformation of human beings into tools, commodities, messages. It's a machine that ran on human suffering and produced the eraser of entire peoples. These stories are not easy to hear, they're not supposed to be. But they must be told because the women music who suffered these atrocities died twice, once in body and once when their stories' music were forgotten. History remembers empires for their borders. But it remembers the Mongols for something far more unsettling, because their legacy isn't just carved music into chronicles or ruins, it's etched into people. About 16 million men alive today carry a genetic music signature that traces back to those campaigns of conquest, fear, and absolute domination. 16 million living reminders of what happens when a civilization weaponizes terror with precision and turns brutality into strategy. But here's what most people don't understand. The Mongols didn't rely on numbers, they didn't rely on luck, and they didn't stumble into power the way so many kingdoms did. They engineered it step by step, city by city, psychology by psychology. Before a single arrow was loosed, their reputation arrived first, whispered across deserts, shared in panic within market squares, carried by merchants fleeing from fallen cities. People surrendered not because they'd seen the Mongols, but because they'd heard them, and fear once planted does the work of 1,000 soldiers. Even now, centuries later, we can still feel the aftershocks of music, a force that understood something terrifyingly simple. Controlling people's minds is far more effective than controlling their walls. So as we close this chapter, remember this. Empires rise, empires fall, but the stories, the warnings, music stay with us. They echo, they repeat, and they remind us the darkest lessons of history are often the ones we're most tempted to forget. Music. If you believe that these lessons must remain alive, if you think the truth about history's most fearsome figures should never fade into silence, then hit like and subscribe. Your support brings more stories from the shadows of our past, stories that don't just inform, but illuminate and sometimes disturb. because the more we understand the monsters of yesterday, the better prepared we are for the ones who appear